All right, welcome to another episode of Liberty Coin and Precious Metals Radio. Today we're sitting down with Jeff Berwick, otherwise known as the Dollar Vigilante. Jeff is known for his work at dollarvigilante.com, where he writes articles on the global financial system as well as alternatives for people who maybe want to live outside of the U.S. or at least hold money outside of the U.S. So thank you for joining us, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Justin. It's great to talk to you again.
Excellent speaking with you again. And for those of you who missed it, Jeff and I spoke back in October during the Libertopia, and you can YouTube our discussion at Liberty Coin and Precious Metals Libertopia series with Jeff Berwick. Jeff, what got you interested in secondary passports, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I'm trying to think what would have got me interested. I guess basically it's the whole concept I have on what's going on in the world today. Passports are actually a fairly new thing. It was only about 100 years ago that people started using them, or actually governments started using them. People didn't want to use them. The governments started forcing people to use them. Before that, we were actually a lot freer. I think of them as mostly just as a slave card. It's basically your document of slavery for your country that you're a citizen of. But because of all the things that governments do nowadays, it's becoming very important to have other options, because what we're going through at the moment and what's making gold rise and silver rise is we're having a collapse of basically the Western monetary system, and I believe this will lead to a collapse of the democratic, socialist, warfare, welfare nation states. And because of that, as this system continues to collapse, governments are going to do whatever they can to stay alive. They're almost like living orphans, and as they go through their death throes, they basically lash out and try to stay alive any way they can. The U.S. government is heavily indebted, impossibly indebted. They could never pay back even a fraction of what they owe. And as they collapse, as the U.S. dollar starts to collapse, they'll begin to do even crazier and crazier things. They'll start to take pensions and start to tax you at ludicrous rates and start to seize assets and those sort of things, start to institute capital controls. And as that happens, you don't want to be stuck with just one passport. You don't want to have just an American passport at that point and be living inside the USA, because you'll have no options. Even right now, Americans don't have a lot of international options. Americans globally are the most enslaved people in history. You cannot go anywhere as an American and open a brokerage account anywhere in the world outside of the U.S. It's basically impossible. The U.S. government has basically told all foreign international brokerages and most banks that do not accept Americans as clients. If you accept them as clients, then we'll come after you with all of our brute and force and all the things the U.S. government does. And because of that, it's very important for Americans especially to get a second passport at this time. While it's still legal, it is legal at this moment in time to get a passport. There's many ways to get a second passport. Some of them, if you have for example, if your grandparents, your parents used to live in, say, a European country like Italy or Poland or any of those places, they usually accept for a passport. If you don't have anything like that, you can actually go to certain countries. We recommend Dominican Republic at the moment. We actually set up a service to help people get passports there. It takes about 3 years and costs total of about $10,000, so it's a little expensive for some people, for sure. And but for me, I wouldn't want to live with just one passport at this point in time, because you really limit your options, and who knows what your government's going to do down the road. So you want to give yourself sort of a get out of jail free card, and a way to get out, or a way to open accounts around the world, or move your assets to other countries. Whereas right now, Americans, they really cannot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, North Americans are not global citizens, and so they do not have very much experience outside of this country, and so they do not recognize the ways in which they're of the most enslaved people in history. And what's particular about the 21st century, I feel, is that it's really a technocracy in which people are enslaved through technology, and so far as cell phones are being able to track, basically everything is able to be stored through nano technologies. And with this information, psychological behaviors are able to be created through not only the medias, but through a number of other means. And now, in terms of passports, you say that they really came to be about in the last 100 years. Were they something that were used right away, or did it take a while for them to begin to take hold with the people of the different with peoples of different nations? I know, for instance, with the income tax, which was instituted in the United States in 1913, this was something that was not paid by a majority of Americans until the 50s. So was there that delay with the use of passports?
Yes, definitely. It was very similar to income tax. It was sort of phased in with all of these sort of devices to enslave you, to have more control of you by your government. They can never do it all at once because no one would stand for it. In 1913, if you said to everyone, you have to give us 30-40% of your income every year, and it'll be taken straight off your check, there would have been a revolt. There would have been a revolution. So they had to start it slowly, started it very small, and then slowly over decades and decades. And they used things like the government public education system to keep people in the dark about all of these issues. They don't teach you about any of this. They don't teach you about how the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913 and how the income tax was also founded at the exact same time as a complete coincidence, I'm sure, and how all these things really affect what's going on. And it was the same with passports. They originally started off as sort of a almost like a nicety, like something you would show to someone and say, hey, you know, I'm from here, and that sort of thing. And then over decades and decades, it became, well, now you cannot travel without one. And now it's become, in the U.S. actually, well, for example, let me give you an example. I read a stat recently that for people under 25 years old, 30% of them have been arrested at one point or another because there's so many illegal in the land of the free, the U.S. You can't really do anything. Everything's illegal. So many people get criminal records, and once you get a criminal record, you're not even allowed to apply for a foreign passport. So when you're applied, but you won't be accepted. So in many ways, people are just being more and more restricted to the point where they almost won't be able to travel at some point outside of their own country. And, you know, the U.S. government has even brought this up in Congress numerous times that if people are behind on their income taxes, then they won't allow them to get them a second passport thing. They haven't enacted that yet, but you can see that's where it's all headed at this point. So that's why I really recommend to people at this point, especially Americans. Americans have it the worst of almost any country on earth right now, except for possible exception of North Korea and Cuba and Venezuela and a few other banana republics. But really, it's an opportunity now for Americans to get a second passport, and then they have some options down the road as things get worse and worse, and the seemingly continuous degradation of the U.S. government and turning into a police state.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you noticed anything in your personal life about your freedoms in terms of being able to travel throughout all of these nations, otherwise from a cultural perspective, or just a personal perspective? Have you been able to grow by experiencing all these different cultures?
Absolutely. When I first started traveling the world in about 2004, I decided to get a sailboat, and I was going to try to sail around the world, and I actually ended up seeing El Salvador about a year later. But I ended up buying a backpack, and I traveled for another 4 years, and I traveled to about 100 countries. And the reason I did that was I wanted to see the world through my own eyes. Because the media, well, first of all, the government education, that doesn't teach you anything about any of that. And then secondly, the media always spins it completely propaganda. It's all the things they say about the rest of the world. They try to make it sound so dangerous. You know, I'm sitting down here. I live in Acapulco, Mexico. If you ask a lot of people in the U.S., they think this is just hell on earth. Well, it's actually paradise. You know, it's much safer here than most places in the U.S. And, you know, a lot of people don't even realize that in a city like Chicago, 30 people get shot every single weekend. But the U.S. media doesn't focus on those sort of things, and they try to make the rest of the world sound dangerous because what they really want to do is take your mind off of how bad it is and how bad it's getting inside the U.S. itself.
So something that strikes me is over the last 2 years or so, we've had a very concerted effort by the mainstream media in the United States to bastardize the living situation in Mexico, which has effectively killed a lot of the tourist industry to Mexico. We're in San Diego, just north of Baja California. And whenever a quick jaunt down across the border to Mexico gets brought up, I would say that a majority of the people cringe because they fear for their lives, even though, like you say, in Southern California, one of the largest metropolises in the United States, one is not much safer.
Yes, and it should be remembered, too, that the only problems that do actually happen down here are 100% caused by the U.S. Their war on drugs, which, back when alcohol was prohibited in the 1930s in the U.S., there were headless bodies in the streets of Chicago every day. It was complete mafia gangster town. When you make things that people want illegal. And so they basically are trying to stop the free market, and that is impossible to do, but all it does is cause huge problems. Because of these narco sort of drug lords down here, they're basically entrepreneurs. They're just trying to get the product to the people who want it, and the government is trying to stop them. And they have no way to settle disputes because they can't go to any normal court or sign contracts and have lawyers and those sort of things. So when they have problems, they shoot each other, and that's what happens.